The auction was in 11 hours. Verity Lacombe stood at the window of the rented room above the chandler's shop and watched the street below fill with morning deliveries. A cart horse moved slowly past, its breath rising in small clouds. The auction house was 3 streets away. She had walked past it twice the day before, not stopping, not looking too long, just enough to know where the side entrance was. She had been in Grayford for 4 days, long enough to find the room, to ask careful questions of the right people, to learn that Mr. Hessop, her stepfather's solicitor, had taken rooms at the Carrington Hotel, and that the papers were expected to be signed by end of week, which meant she had until Friday. Today was Tuesday. She turned from the window and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. The name she was using was Verity Lane. She had chosen it deliberately, close enough to her own that she might answer to it without hesitating, different enough that Hessop would not connect it to the girl he had last seen at 17, weeping in a solicitor's office while her stepfather explained, in quiet and measured terms, what the death of her mother meant for the Lacombe estate. It meant it was no longer hers. Her mother had not updated the will. Everyone knew it. Everyone regretted it. No one, it seemed, was prepared to do anything about it. Verity was 24 now. She had spent 7 years learning what could and could not be done about a will that had been legally executed, witnessed properly, and filed with all the correct offices. The answer, the honest answer, was not much, but there was a difference between the will itself and the assets that had been improperly transferred before the will was settled, and that difference was what had brought her to Grayford. She opened the small leather case on the floor beside the bed and checked the contents again. The letters were there, bound with a narrow ribbon, 3 of them. Her mother had written them, though only one was addressed. The other 2 had never been sent. Verity had found them in a hat box at the back of a wardrobe in her aunt's house in Halifax. The same wardrobe her stepfather's people had apparently missed when they'd cleared the townhouse 3 months after the funeral. She had read them so many times she could recite them. She put the case back under the bed. The position she had applied for was housekeeper's assistant at Ashvane Court, which stood 12 miles outside Grayford and was the reason there was any money left to fight over at all. Ashvane had been the Lacombe family's property for 80 years. Her grandfather had built the east wing. Her mother had grown up in the nursery on the 3rd floor. Verity herself had spent every summer of her childhood there until she hadn't. Her stepfather, Gerald Mountford, had sold it 7 months ago, or thought he had. The sale was contested on a single technical point that Verity's solicitor in Halifax had identified after considerable effort. A clause in the original deed that restricted transfer to parties outside the family line without the signature of the eldest living descendant. Her stepfather had not obtained that signature. He could not have obtained it because the solicitor handling the sale had not known she existed. She had made sure of that. The buyer was a man named Lord Ashwick. She did not know much about him except that he was said to be from the north, that he had purchased the property site largely unseen through a series of intermediaries, and that he had been in residence for 6 months. The auction was for the remaining contents of the estate, furniture, paintings, household items, that Mountford was claiming as separate personal property not covered by the deed restriction. She disagreed, which was why she needed to be inside the house. The housekeeper at Ashvane Court was a woman called Mrs. Penwick, not a name Verity recognized from her childhood, which meant she had been brought in with the new owner. The assistant position had been posted 3 weeks ago, and Verity had applied under her assumed name with a letter of reference she was not proud of, but which was technically accurate in every particular it mentioned. She had been given the job by return post. The road to Ashvane took 40 minutes by hired cart. Verity sat on the bench beside a man who did not speak, which she appreciated, and watched the landscape grow familiar in the way that places from childhood do. Not exactly as remembered, but not wrong either. The beech trees along the lower drive were larger. The gate had been repainted. Otherwise, it was the same. She did not allow herself to feel anything about this until she was ready to feel it, and she was not ready yet. Mrs. Penwick was waiting in the entrance hall when Verity arrived. She was a small, efficient-looking woman in her 50s, with the expression of someone who had high standards, and was accustomed to being disappointed by other people's failure to meet them. "Miss Lane," she said, looking Verity over in the way that housekeepers look over new staff, not unkindly, but completely. "You're prompt. I value prompt." "Thank you," Verity said. "Lord Ashwick's instructions are that the house is to be catalogued ahead of Thursday's auction. Mr. Hessop, the seller's representative, will be arriving Wednesday to oversee the removal of items. Your work until then is to assist me in preparing the inventory list and ensuring nothing in the agreed catalog has been damaged or removed since the original assessment." "Of course," Verity said. This was better than she had expected. She had assumed she would need to find reasons to access the library and the study, where her grandfather's papers were stored. Instead, it appeared she was being asked to walk through the entire house with a list. She kept her expression pleasant and attentive. "Lord Ashwick keeps to the east wing during the day," Mrs. Penwick continued, handing her an apron. "You will not be in that part of the house. If his lordship requires anything, Trumbull, that's the senior footman, will attend to it. You are not to disturb him. Understood? He is." Mrs. Penwick paused. "He is particular about his privacy. I mention it only so there are no misunderstandings." Verity nodded and tied the apron strings. The first day passed in rooms she knew and did not acknowledge knowing. She walked behind Mrs. Penwick through the sitting room, the morning room, the large dining room, with its long table and its portrait of her grandmother on the south wall. That portrait was on the catalog list. Her stepfather was selling it. She wrote the item number beside it in the ledger and did not look at it directly. That evening she was given a small room on the second floor of the service wing. She sat on the bed, better than the one in Grayford, and took out the letters. She read the second one, the one her mother had addressed to no one, the one that began, "I should have done this before now, and I didn't, and I'm sorry for it." She folded it carefully and put it back. On Wednesday morning, Hessop arrived. Verity knew him immediately, though he had grayed considerably in 7 years and moved more slowly. He was shown into the front drawing room, where Mrs. Penwick met him with the inventory. Verity was instructed to bring tea. She did so, keeping her face neutral, keeping her back to him for as long as she reasonably could while she arranged the cups, and then turning and pouring and refilling his cup when he asked, and he did not look at her once. She was, after all, the housekeeper's assistant. He spent the morning in the drawing room and the dining room. In the afternoon, he went to the library. The library was where the problem was. Verity had known this since Halifax. Among the items listed in the auction catalog were 14 boxes of papers described as household records and correspondence, various pre-1890. These were her grandfather's papers. Among them, she was nearly certain, based on her mother's letter, was a document that would significantly complicate the terms of the original deed restriction. Not the restriction itself, but the conditions under which it had been drafted and to whom it applied. She needed to see those boxes. She could not see them while Hessop was in the library. She went back to the kitchen and waited. Mrs. Penwick set her to polishing silver, which she did with complete attention for an hour and a half until Trumbull came down to say that Hessop had gone up to rest before dinner, and that his lordship wanted the library aired before 8 o'clock. Mrs. Penwick went to speak with the cook about dinner arrangements. Verity took a duster from the supply cupboard and went upstairs. The library was as she remembered it, which almost undid her. The smell of it, old paper, coal smoke, the particular dry warmth of a room that has been carefully maintained, was the smell of every rainy afternoon she had ever spent there as a child. Her grandfather had kept a tin of biscuits on the third shelf from the bottom of the left case. She didn't look to see if anything remained. She went directly to the south wall, where she knew the older records were stored, and found the boxes. They were stacked neatly. Someone had written the auction lot numbers on the sides in chalk. She found what she was looking for in the fifth box, underneath a folder of household accounts from 1871. It was a letter, and it was in her grandfather's handwriting, and it was addressed to the family solicitor of the time, and it said, in clear and explicit terms, that the deed restriction had been drafted with the specific intent of protecting the rights of female descendants equally with male, a point that had not been made explicit in the deed itself, but that her grandfather had considered settled. It was not, legally, the document she had hoped for. She had hoped for a codicil or an amendment. What she had was a letter of intent, written before the deed was finalized, which expressed clearly what the deed was meant to accomplish. It was not nothing. Her solicitor in Halifax had told her that a letter of intent could be used to establish the purpose behind ambiguous language in the original document. This letter was not ambiguous. It was precise, and it was in her grandfather's hand, and she recognized the handwriting the way she recognized the smell of the room. She stood there for a moment longer than she should have. "That's not on the catalog list." She turned. Lord Ashwick was standing in the doorway. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, and taller, with the kind of face that gave very little away. He was looking at the letter in her hand with an expression that was not angry exactly, but was the expression of a man who had asked a question and intended to have it answered. "No," she said, "it isn't." He came into the room. He did not reach for the letter. He looked at her instead with a steadiness that she found, despite everything, slightly unnerving. "Mrs. Penwick said the library was to be aired," she said. "It was," he said. "I didn't ask about the airing." She made a decision. She had been making decisions all week. Small, tactical decisions, each one calculated. This one felt different because it was not tactical. It was a decision about whether to tell the truth, and she had not planned for it. "I'm looking for something," she said. "I can see that. It belongs to my family." He was quiet for a moment. "Your name is not Lane," he said. It was not a question. "No! Who are you?" She set the letter down on the library table. "My name is Verity Lacombe. My grandfather built the east wing of this house. My mother grew up in the nursery on the third floor. My stepfather sold this property 7 months ago without the signature required by the original deed, because no one in the transaction knew I existed." She paused. "I've been trying to correct that." He looked at the letter. He looked at her. He pulled out the chair beside the library table and sat down. "Sit," he said. She sat. "Tell me," he said, "from the beginning," she told him. Not everything. Not the hat box in Halifax, not the hours she had spent in the reading room of the provincial library, not the 3 solicitors who had told her it was unlikely before she found the 4th who said it was possible. She told him the structural facts, the deed, the clause, her stepfather, the auction. He listened without interrupting. This was, she would think later, the first thing she noticed about him, that he listened completely, without preparing his response while she was still speaking. When she finished, he looked at the letter again. "I paid a fair price," he said. "I know. I'm not your stepfather's accomplice. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to happen?" It was a direct question, and she had a direct answer. "I want the auction stopped. I want the papers, specifically this letter, and the contents of these boxes, recognized as part of the property and not sold separately. I want Hesop to be made aware that the deed restriction applies and that the transfer cannot be finalized without my signature, which I have not given and will not give until there is a proper accounting of what was taken." He looked at the letter again. "And if the auction proceeds tomorrow, then these boxes are sold as Lot 47, and the letter goes with them, and my solicitor will have to attempt to retrieve it through the courts, which will take years and cost more than it's worth." She paused. "Which is likely what Mountford is counting on." He stood. He went to the window and looked out at the dark garden for a moment, and then he turned back. "I'll speak to Trumbull about the auction arrangements," he said. "Thursday morning, before Hesop comes down." She looked at him. Why? He seemed to consider the question genuinely, as though it had not occurred to him that it required an answer. "Because your grandfather built the east wing," he said finally. "And because you came here yourself, which suggests to me that the legal route is not moving fast enough." "It isn't," she said. "And because," he said more quietly, "your stepfather sold me something that was not entirely his to sell. I don't find that comfortable." She looked at him for a long moment. She had prepared, over the past several months, for a number of scenarios. She had prepared for discovery and dismissal, for Hesop recognizing her, for the auction proceeding while she attempted to stop it through the courts. She had not prepared for this. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet." He picked up the letter carefully and held it toward her. "Keep this with you. Don't let Hesop see it." She took it. Their fingers did not quite touch. That night she could not sleep. She lay on the narrow bed in the service wing and listened to the house settle around her. It was the same settling she remembered. The particular creak of the east corridor, the way the wind came across the fields and hit the north-facing windows at an angle. She had lain awake in the nursery as a child and listened to exactly this and believed, the way children believe in the permanence of things, that it would always be there. It had not been there, and then, strangely, it was again. She thought about Lord Ashwick. She thought about the way he had listened. She thought about the question, "What do you want to happen?" and the directness of it, and how unused she had become to being asked what she wanted. She was not naive. She understood that a man who had purchased a contested property and then offered to assist the person contesting it was not doing so entirely without self-interest. He would want clarity on the title. He would want the legal situation resolved cleanly. It was practical, and she understood practical. But he had also said, "Your grandfather built the east wing," and he had said it as though it mattered, as though it was a reason. She folded the letter carefully and put it beneath the pillow and slept. Hesop came down to breakfast at 8:30. Lord Ashwick was already in the dining room. Verity was not there. She was in the kitchen at Mrs. Penwick's direction, but the kitchen shared a wall with the dining room, and the connecting door was not fully latched, and she heard everything. Lord Ashwick said that he had concerns about the provenance of the items in Lot 47, and that he had instructed the auction house to remove that lot pending a legal review. He said it pleasantly, in the way that men who do not need to raise their voices do not raise them. He said that his solicitor would be in contact with Hesop's office by the end of the week. Hesop's voice changed. It went from easy to careful to something harder underneath. He said there was nothing irregular about the lot. He said the papers had been assessed and catalogued. He said any delay would need to be justified in writing. Lord Ashwick said that he was happy to provide that in writing, and that he trusted Mr. Hesop would find it satisfactory. There was a pause. Hesop said he would need to contact Mr. Mountford. Lord Ashwick said that was entirely Hesop's prerogative. The kitchen door swung slightly in the draught, and Mrs. Penwick, who had been listening with an expression that revealed absolutely nothing, reached out and pressed it quietly closed. She looked at Verity. "Whatever you've done," she said, in a tone that was neither approving nor disapproving, "make sure you've done it correctly." "I have a letter," Verity said. Mrs. Penwick nodded once, "Then keep it somewhere dry." The auction proceeded on Thursday without Lot 47. Hessop spent the morning in the drawing room with a pinched expression and a cold cup of tea. He did not look at Verity when she came to remove it. She did not offer him another. In the afternoon, when the auction house men had gone, and the remaining furniture was being covered in dust sheets, she found Lord Ashwick in the library. He was standing at the window with a book open in his hand, though he did not appear to be reading it. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. Miss Lacombe. It was the first time anyone had called her that in 4 days. She had not realized how much it would cost her until it didn't cost her anything at all, until it was simply her name, said plainly, by someone who knew what it was. "I wanted to thank you," she said, properly. "You said not to thank you yet," she added, because she had said it and she did not think he had forgotten. "I did," he said. He set the book down. "Has your solicitor been notified? I sent a letter this morning." "Good." He looked out the window. "The legal process will still take time." "Yes. The papers in those boxes should be protected in the meantime. I'll have them moved to the house records room rather than the auction storage." She was quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to do any of this." He turned from the window. "No," he said, "I didn't." She looked at him across the room. This man who had bought her family's house and then helped her fight for what was in it, for reasons she was still not entirely sure she understood. The afternoon light was coming in at the angle it always came in at this time of year, through the tall south windows, falling across the shelves and the floor and the old familiar spines. "My grandfather's tin of biscuits," she said. "Third shelf from the bottom, left case. Is it still there?" He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, but close to it. He crossed to the left case, crouched, and looked. "No," he said. "No," she said. "I didn't really think so." "There's a book of pressed flowers," he said, "someone's initials in the cover. E.L. Eleanor Lacombe, her grandmother." She did not say anything for a moment. "That's not on the catalog list either," he said quietly. "No," she said. "It wouldn't be." He stood, and he held the book out to her, and she took it, and she held it carefully in both hands the way you hold something that has waited a long time to be held again. "The house will still need to be sorted out properly," he said. "The legal question of title, your position in it, I know. It may be," he said, choosing the words with some care, "that the resolution is not what you originally intended. The courts may determine that the deed restriction applies, but that the property transfer stands, with compensation. Or they may not. I don't know. But I think—" He stopped. "What?" she said. "I think your grandfather intended this house to be the kind of place where someone like you could come back to it," he said, "whatever the papers ultimately say." She looked at him. She had spent 7 years being careful and precise and tactical, had spent them learning to want only what was achievable and to let the rest go. She was not sure what to do with something that did not fit inside those categories. "I'd like to come back," she said, "properly. Not as the housekeeper's assistant. Then come back properly," he said, "when you're ready." The road to Grayford took 40 minutes. She sat on the bench and watched the house grow smaller through the trees and then disappear behind the last stand of beeches on the lower drive, the same beeches that had been there all her life. In her bag was a letter of pressed flowers with her grandmother's initials. In her coat pocket were 3 letters in her mother's handwriting, and a 4th document in her grandfather's hand, and the beginning of a legal case that would take months and might not end the way she had planned. She looked at the road ahead. 7 years ago she had left with nothing and had believed, for a time, that nothing was what she deserved, that being too young, too female, too far from the center of the decisions that had been made about her life, meant that the decision stood, and she did not. She did not believe that anymore. The cart horse moved at its steady pace. The town came into view. Somewhere ahead of her in an office in Halifax, a solicitor was reading a letter she had written that morning and beginning to understand what she had found. She put her hand in her coat pocket and touched the edge of her grandfather's letter, just to be sure it was still there. It was.